Hi folks, so this is a course overview video. Just going to tell you what we're going to be doing for the semester, right? So this is non-binary studies. Non-binary studies is a subdiscipline within trans studies that focuses on folks whose gender expansive identities do not fit into the neat little boxes of M or F, okay? And there are lots of different, I want you to think about non-binary as a umbrella term, just like trans is an umbrella term. I want you to think about this as also folks who, to some extent, disidentify with the sex-gender combo given to them at birth, but they also understand their identities as not simply M or F or not M or F at all, right? So just sort of keep that in mind. Or some sort of fluid combination or no gender at all, okay? So just sort of keep that in mind. Although I do want to say too, and this is just a sidebar, but I think that we could actually say that while folks who understand themselves as agender are certainly trans in the sense that no one is designated agender at birth, I can also like hold space and value that while agender is not part of a gender binary, right? In the sense that there's no gender, I can understand if agender folks too would be like, hey, I said hold the gender, right? So it could be orbiting, around trans studies and non-binary studies. So that's just sidebar. I don't want you to think that I'm playing fast and loose with like gender expansive identities. I'm not. This is just a video. Okay, so this is non-binary studies. And basically, this is a little bit different than a trans studies class, only in the sense that trans studies, I want you to think about that as just kind of like a zooming out, right? Whereas non-binary studies is kind of like doing a deep dive into a very particular sort of subset, right, of trans studies. So I don't want to make this just as a repeat of a trans studies course, which I also teach and I think is a cool and rad course that I hope you do take, right? If you haven't taken it already. But I want you to kind of keep in mind that my philosophy in teaching this class is that non-binary folks are speaking and that non-binary scholars and non-binary creators should be centered in the class, okay? So that's kind of what the premise of this course is. And so if you were sort of wondering like, well, what do you do in a culture that like is foundationally organized around this sort of gender binary? Like, how do you resist that, right? Well, there are lots of ways we can do that through education, through community organizing, through mutual aid, through passing laws, all that kind of stuff. But one of the best tools that gender expansive people have had at their disposal in terms of not just resistance, but in terms of world building is art. So don't let anyone ever tell you that art is not powerful, because there are ways in which gender expansive people have always been creating worlds and building worlds for gender expansive people to recognize each other and to survive and thrive within this space, all right? And so that's kind of the focus of this course. And there are going to be 7 different units, and we're going to take a look at the ways that non-binary and gender expansive folks are speaking through various forms of like creativity. So we're going to start with like a gender 101 in these first couple of weeks through the ways that non-binary people are speaking through non-fictional podcasts. And then we are just going to like shimmy on over into like other ways that like non-binary people are building space and building worlds for themselves in creative genres. We're going to start with something that is going to seem super recognizable, short fiction. You're like, yeah, I dig it. I know short fiction. So we're going to look at some non-binary people who are writing in that space. And we are also going to check out how non-binary people are writing their own stories and publishing those through like web film series. And then from there, we'll go on to fictional audio dramas, right? So you can sort of think about audio dramas is sort of like the kissing cousin to the podcast. It's just the difference is, even though it is a podcast, it's like a fictional sort of program, right? So we're going to look at that. And then from there, we are going to look at how non-binary people are writing and centering each other in young adult literature. I know we can do like literature, but I wanted to do young adult literature because one of the key aims that I have in this course is to center joy not only centering non-binary people actually speaking, but to center like the joy of that, right? So that it's not just like, oh, we have a token character that some, person who is not trans is writing, right? This is an entirely different sort of situation where these are stories that non-binary people are telling, right? And it matters a lot. So again, young adult lit, there's this super adorable book that we're going to read. And I've excuse me, already procured you a copy. And then we're going to be actually looking at, I'm laughing, but it's just because it's so surprising and delightful when I was like coming up with material for this course. But there are also folks who are producing like transmedia like musicals. So there was like a non-binary musical. So we're going to like listen to it on Spotify and then look at all of like the cool like transmedia content that was like created around that, around this sort of musical. So that's super neat. And then from there, we are going to end with looking at the ways that non-binary people have been engaging in world building through gaming and online video games. And so the video games that we're going to be looking at are low cost and free. And the low cost ones I'm actually going to buy and gift to you. So the idea is that you paid for this class, everything else in here should be free. That's my philosophy for the class. So you don't have to pay for nothing. All right. So there's that. That is the course. All right. I do want to say, when I say you don't have to pay for nothing, you don't have to pay for nothing. I did pay for lots of things in this class. So one of the things that I do want to just hold space for is that like there are non-binary people who create their content for free, and that's awesome. And we love them. But obviously we want to like value our non-binary creators. The only difference here is that like I purchased all of these things so that you didn't have to. All right. So that's just putting that out there. Just, anyway, respect people's art. All right, so that's the gist of the course. In terms of course objectives, you can kind of check these out. I don't want to like read at you. Y'all know how to do that. So just kind of check that out. But the idea is that you're going to get a more nuanced understanding of the ways that non-binary people are articulating and carving out spaces for themselves in a world that is overwhelmingly sort of reinforced this sort of like gender binary, which BTW is rooted in white supremacy and colonialism. So there's that. In case anyone's ever been like, oh, non-binary isn't normal. Actually, the new kid on the block is the gender binary. Gender expansiveness and gender cosmologies that are far more complex have always been older. So don't let anyone tell you different. All right. So, but that's a sidebar. And if you want to get into the cool history of that, you should totally take a trans studies course with me, which is also a rad course, but it's not this course. All right. So in terms of required materials, I talked about this a little bit in the email, but you're going to need a Slack account and your Kent State G Suite. And then you are going to want to sign up for the latter part of the semester, a Steam account. Steam is just like an online gaming platform. It's free to sign up. I'm going to like, when we're looking at games, I'm going to buy them and then push them to you. And then there's this free like online, I guess it's like an app. It's a video game app called The Arcana, and it is like super adorable and queer. It's like a mystery romance, a whodunit, and a dating sim at once. Sign me up, based around tarot. What? So anyway, just eventually download that. It's free, so just kind of keep that in mind. So those are kind of the required materials. So in terms of assignments in this class, there are not major assignments in this class. There's also not an exam in this class. And you might be thinking, wow, GPAT's kind of weird, but hear me out. I don't think that if learning, basically assignments are supposed to be assessing what you're learning. But the thing is that learning is not a linear process. Learning is something that happens along and along, right? But also on top of that, I don't think that learning should be punitive, right? And I don't think that you are going to get the most out of this class if I'm always asking you to have the right answers, et cetera, et cetera. So basically, the way that you are going to earn a grade in this class is I want you to think about, we've got 28 days, all right, in this semester, all right? And you are going to earn a grade by completing the homework and then showing up with your whole self and like genuinely engaging in class activities. That's it. That's the assignment, friends. doing your homework, and then participating actively in class. And we're going to be doing some like cool projects. So it's not like, I'm just talking at you. It's going to be like this neat collaborative thing. So I want you to think about that as like every day is a new opportunity to grow and learn and show that you are learning, which is actually what learning is about. So I want this class to be a situation where learning feels like a joy and like you want to show up in this class. All right. Now, I also want to acknowledge and hold space for the fact that we are still living in like a global pandemic sort of situation. So obviously, ideally, yeah, it'd be neat if everyone could show up every day of class, but that might not be the case. So there's just kind of like a sliding scale. So if you can make it like 24 times out of 20, if you can make it 24 times out of the 28, that counts as 100% in my book. Does that sort of make sense? So it's like the sliding scale downward from that, right? And you'll notice that I've only got like the A and B grades listed. Basically, the thing is, if you start missing like a ton of class, like once you probably miss like 3 classes, I'm just going to check on you just to see if you're okay, right? Because I care. But no one who has signed up for this class and who is like genuinely participating in good faith is going to fail. All right. So just sort of keep that in mind and hold on to that. All right. So just keep in mind again, that in terms of participation, because this class, I don't want you to think it's like a cakewalk. It's just that like you're doing the things in class. It's like active participation actually becomes something that's important, right? That you aren't going to be phoning in, right? So again, just remember that the expectation is that every time you come to class, you've genuinely completed the homework and that you're actively engaged in that day's activities, okay? And so there's a bit on participation in there, right? In terms of like peer-to-peer interactions, I'm not going to ask that, like, which is this, like, I think death by discussion board thing where the professor's like, oh, respond to like an absurd amount of your peers. Anytime that I ask you to like write something, is going to be super short, like max 5 sentences, right? If that. Most of the time it's going to be like 2 to 3 sentences. And then I'm going to ask you to respond to 2 of your peers. And the reason for that is because I want you to actually take the time to like actually engage with what they're saying and then respond to it like authentically. And so that you and that person can like have a back and forth and like let it be an actual conversation. Now, the other thing though, is especially since there is such a small number of folks in this class, is just kind of keep in mind that, try to do like a little bit of a do-si-do when you are interacting with people so that you're not interacting with the same people over and over again, okay? But we don't want anyone to feel snubbed, all right? The last bit is just like, please be decent to each other, right? So I am not expecting that everybody is going to like wholesale embrace everything that they encounter in this class, but this is definitely not the place to like play the devil's advocate around like people's gender identities or other marginalized aspects of a person's identity, because friends, like the devil has enough advocates, I assure you. So all I'm saying is, maybe you don't agree with something, that's super duper fine. But rather than fixating on that, what I want you to do instead, which is the far more intellectual thing, is focus on what you can use. So focus on the things that do inspire you and that do delight you, right? And let those other things percolate, all right? Just remember that this is about like world building, not tearing them down, all right? So just be cool, because I've like worked so hard to set up a good vibe in this class. In terms of contacting me, you can obviously contact me during class time via Slack, but also if there's something like in terms of like emergency wise, you can also text me. My cell phone number is right here. All right. On Slack, you can either use the Ask a GPAT channel, and that is really just kind of like raising your hand in class and me answering the question. And sometimes it's actually like a public service, because if you have the question, it is entirely possible that someone else does. So just sort of keep that in mind. You can email me if you want, but I think it's actually faster for you to use the Ask a GPAT channel or to just direct message me on Slack. And the reason I say that is because I get something absurd, like 50 or 60 emails a day, and it's a lot and it's horrible, and I just want to make sure that your stuff doesn't get like buried under like what I'm just going to call higher ed spam, okay? So we've talked about like plugging in my phone number. My office hours those are not my office hours. You just ignore that. I'm just going to fix this right here. See, these are the gems in these like long ass videos. It's sort of like the Easter eggs of my weirdness if you've gotten this far. Anyway, my office hours are from 9:30 to 10:45, Tuesday and Thursday. Do give me a heads up if you want to go to my office hours. They're on Zoom, and obviously I need to like make sure that one, I'm not in my bathrobe, but also not interacting with someone else in my office hours. All right. Now, there is a sort of like disclaimer about LGBT studies courses. And so this is the thing that I want to say, like as a general rule, right? I've just said like, I want to create classes that are joyful and life affirming and that center the voices of, marginalized scholars speaking for themselves and marginalized creatives speaking for themselves. But there are two assumptions that I have run into in my mumble teen years teaching and higher ed LGBT studies classes. And the first is this idea that like LGBT studies classes, by virtue of being like a queer or trans person or being an ally, means that they're going to be easy, right? And that you're going to know everything already. Like, first of all, LGBTQIA plus identity, right, is expansive. It's vast. And I've been like dedicating my career to this. And I am often humbled by the shit I don't know. So like, just kind of practice that humility and realizing that you're going to encounter stuff that you don't know and that challenges you because it's like it's sort of at your peripheral, right? So just sort of keep that in mind. And then also too, keep in mind like, that if we like value each other and we value the worlds that we're creating and like the scholarship that we're creating, the intellectual ideas that we're contributing to the world, that of course we would say, well, yeah, like absolutely. LGBT studies should be rigorous because it's an academic discipline, just like, philosophy, just like physics, right? So, and that obviously, there are going to be things that are going to be intellectually challenging because that's kind of the point, right? So just sort of keep that in mind. And if you encounter something that like challenges something that you thought you already knew about gender or anything else, just kind of in the words of Finding Dory or Finding Nemo, just keep swimming. Okay. So there's that. The other thing is, I sometimes get this notion that like, oh, like LGBT studies courses are not going to challenge my biases. Spoiler, we all have biases. Just because you are LGBTQIA plus identified or an ally, it doesn't mean that you're not going to encounter something in this class that isn't going to like kind of press up against something. You're like, oh, wow, that was a tender spot that I didn't realize, right? This challenges me. So I want you to hold two pieces of information just kind of close to you. One is that like all of us respond this way at some point, right? And it's kind of like our lizard brain. That's what my counselor tells me. Like, I think there's like a whole bunch of like counseling that talks about the lizard brain, right? And the idea is that all of us have that and all of us kind of respond in these knee-jerk ways. So anytime like something happens and you're like, oh, this is different. It's like your lizard brain like jumping in and being like, wait, what? So just kind of keep that in mind that all of us are going to have some sort of moment, whether it's in this class or in another, where we're like, no, right? This is not for me. This is BS or whatever. But actually, if you let that stuff percolate, you might like come back to it and be like, that actually checks out, right? So like, all I'm saying is you don't have to agree with everything, but just like let shit percolate. And if it like challenges you, just kind of like ask yourself some sort of like gentle questions around that. And that goes down to like the last thing, which is that like, I don't know why we have this idea that like difficult emotions are only ever negative, but like sometimes like having a difficult moment, a difficult emotional response to something is almost always a precursor to growth. And so I want you to hold space for those moments if you encounter them in this class and to just not attach negative labels like, oh, if I responded in this way, like I'm a bad person or I'm just not this enough. Don't do that to yourself. Just like ask yourself some like gentle questions about like why you're responding in that way and how you can learn from it. And then just kind of set it aside and just kind of like go with the flow. And that's it, my friends. This is like the overview of the class. This is probably far more detailed than I would have been in person. My bad. But you got some like weird, fun, me being a weirdo in here too. So if you've gotten this far, good on you. All right. I will see ya in all of the other fun videos and on Slack and everywhere else. Okay? Take care.